You hear it everywhere on the radio, in the grocery store, in the biggest stadiums on earth. It's the sound that defines generations, sells millions, and never stops evolving. It's pop music. But how did we get here? Where did the bubblegum melodies, the chart topping hooks, and the iconic star power truly begin? Welcome to the Pop Timeline, the podcast that digs deep into the roots of popular music. Each week, we trace the threads from Tin Pan Alley to the rise of MTV, breaking down the artists, the innovations, and the cultural moments that forged the sound of pop. Join your hosts, music historian and cultural commentator, as they explore the original blueprints of the biggest genre in the world. In this episode, The Birth of the Hit Factory, we rewind to the early 20th century to discover how technology, songwriting, and the American dream first turned music into a massive, profitable industry. Get ready to hear the history behind the harmony. This is the Pop Timeline.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on, a pretty ambitious archaeological deep dive, you could say. We're tracing the fundamental DNA of modern popular music. When you listen to a chart-topping hit today, doesn't matter what genre, what you're hearing is really the result of this long lineage. It's defined by, over a century of intertwined technological shifts, shrewd commercial calculations, and some pretty dramatic cultural revolution.
That's absolutely right. Our mission here is to trace that journey. We want to focus on the foundational pioneers, the key figures, and the genres they sort of mashed together, synthesized, to create what we now just universally call pop.
Yeah, pop.
And the history of pop. It's not just about the sound itself. It's really a history of distribution, how music got out there. It's about market segmentation, who they were selling to, and, crucially, how technology was adopted along the way.
And we really have to start at the true beginning. I mean, long before microphones and electric guitars were everywhere. Because historically, when we talk about pop, we aren't just describing a musical style, are we?
No, not initially. We're defining music design specifically, explicitly for mass appeal, wide audience.
Yeah.
That was the goal.
Okay.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is that the whole mindset around success in pop music was, and you could argue still is, fundamentally opposed to how we think about classical music.
How so?
Well, for centuries, classical artists were, praised, exalted even, for their individuality, for defying expectations, breaking rules, introducing radical new ideas.
Right, pushing boundaries.
Exactly. But in the popular music world, historically, an artist was actually praised for the opposite.
Yeah.
For conforming to what the audience already liked, for giving people exactly what they wanted, efficiently, again and again. That idea, that adherence to market demand, that's really the spirit of pop at its core.
Giving the people what they want. And that commercial demand, that whole system, it first really came together in one specific place, a place that sounds almost legendary now, Tin Pan Alley.
Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of a movie, but it's real. Located on West 28th Street in Manhattan, New York City, it was the physical engine, noisy, remarkably efficient, driving this early music industry.
We're talking late 19th, early 20th centuries here.
Right. And it wasn't some glamorous studio complex like you might picture today. It was just this dense collection of music publishers, all crammed together.
And the name itself, Tin Pan Alley, it kind of tells you everything, doesn't it? About the vibe.
It really does.
Yeah.
Allegedly, it was a journalist, Moreau H. Rosenfeld, who gave it that famous, slightly derogatory nickname.
Why? What was the story?
Well, the story goes that the sound coming out of all those open windows,
Yeah.
Dozens of studios, each playing a different song at the same time on these cheap upright pianos in demo rooms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he said it sounded exactly like someone banging on tin pans in an alleyway. Just this cacophony.
An incredible noise factory.
Totally. And the business model they developed there was genuinely revolutionary for its time. It really set the financial blueprint for modern mass media, in a way. You had composers, lyricists, huge names like Irving Berlin, George M. Cohan, and performers, all working in close proximity with the publishers.
All for mutual financial gain.
Right, absolutely. But their main product, the thing they were really selling, wasn't recorded sound yet. It was sheet music.
Ah, right. Pieces of paper.
Exactly. Sheet music was the first truly mass-consumable music product for the middle-class home. Think about it. If you bought a piano, which was a huge status symbol back then, you needed something to play on it.
Makes sense.
So publishers would sell millions, literally millions, of copies of sheet music. That became the central engine financing the whole operation. And this system, importantly, created an early structure for intellectual property rights. Money flowed from the performance or the sale of the sheet back to the publisher, and then eventually some of it trickled down to the songwriter.
So this is really the beginning of music royalties as we know them.
Pretty much, yeah. If you look closely at the mechanics, it established that foundation. The publishers controlled the copyright, naturally taking a significant cut. The songwriter made money based purely on the volume of sales. And this model cemented that separation between the creator, the writer, and the performer, who might just popularize the song.
A split that defined things for decades.
Oh, absolutely. Until, much later when rock and roll artists started insisting on writing their own material. That changed the dynamic considerably.
Now, central to driving those sheet music sales, you had these really colorful characters called song pluggers.
Ah, the song pluggers. Yeah, they weren't just passive clerks sitting behind a counter. These guys were the industry's original, aggressive, viral marketers. Before viral was even a thing.
What exactly did they do?
They were genuinely fascinating figures, usually expert pianists or singers, and their whole job was just demonstration, playing the songs.
So they'd sit in department stores, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Sit in a department store, playing the newest songs over and over and over again until a crowd gathered, got the tune stuck in their head, and hopefully bought the sheet music.
Repetition, repetition.
But their tactics could be pretty extreme, too. They'd infiltrate public events like vaudeville shows. Sometimes they'd buy, dozens of tickets for their guys just to go in, boom, a new tune.
Broom it. What does that mean?
It meant they'd just start singing the chorus loudly from the audience, maybe 30 times a night, scattered around the theater,
Yes.
just ensuring that people walked out humming that melody, whether they wanted to or not.
Wow, that's aggressive.
Totally.
Yeah.
They essentially forced the song into the public consciousness. They were the engine of hit creation back then, making sure a song gained traction before mass media could really even distribute the idea of the song widely.
But even as sheet music sales were hitting their peak in the early 1900s, technology was lurking, wasn't it? Ready to kind of make that whole model obsolete.
Oh, absolutely. The next phase of pop required moving the music off the paper, which, remember, still needed someone to perform it, and onto a physical object that actually contained the sound itself.
And that shift, gosh, from relying on live performance or home performance to a recorded, reproducible product, you could argue that's the single biggest technological leap in the whole history of pop music.
I think you could, yeah. It allowed the middle class, for the very first time, to consume professional musical performances right there in their own homes, without needing a performer present.
So where does that story start? Edison.
It starts, of course, with Thomas Edison's phonograph back in 1877. That machine used tinfoil wrapped around a rotating cylinder to record and reproduce sound. An absolute scientific marvel at the time. People were astonished.
But it wasn't immediately a music industry disruptor, was it?
No, not really. Initially, it was treated much more like a scientific novelty. The sound quality, the fidelity was pretty poor. The cylinders themselves were fragile, easy to break. And duplication, incredibly difficult and expensive.
How did they even copy them?
You essentially had to re-record the performance over and over again to create individual copies. There was no easy way to mass-produce them, so it didn't immediately threaten the huge established sheet music market.
Okay, so what changed?
That changed completely with Emil Berliner and his invention, the gramophone. And crucially, Berliner replaced Edison's fragile cylinders with flat discs. That was the genius move.
Flat discs. Why was that so important?
Well, think about it. Cylinders were bulky, hard to store, hard to stamp out consistently in large numbers. Flat discs, though, they could be easily mass-produced using a stamping technique, kind of like manufacturing coins or small metal parts. Much more efficient.
Right, standardization and durability.
Exactly. Those were the economic keys. It enabled the true mass production of sound recordings. Suddenly, music became accessible and affordable to the growing middle class. Before this, access to high-quality musical entertainment was mostly for the elite people who could afford instruments or hire musicians. Now, anyone could buy a machine and a stack of records.
And this immediately sets up the first big media battle, right? The 1920s, disc versus paper.
Precisely. The first great media war of the 20th century.
And what really tipped the scales in favor of the disc? Because sheet music was still huge.
The real game changer was the advancement in electrical recording in the mid-1920s. Before this, recording sound relied purely on acoustic horns. Performers literally had to shout or blast their instruments directly into this big cone connected to the cutting stylus.
Which must have sounded pretty rough.
Yeah, very limited dynamics, very boxy sound. But electrical recording introduced the microphone.
Ah, the microphone.
The introduction of microphone technology dramatically improved the sound quality of the gramophone. It allowed for a much wider dynamic range, capturing far more musical nuance, subtlety. As this tech spread, sheet music sales just plummeted. The recording industry, based on selling these superior-sounding discs, was now officially born.
But no sooner does the record industry establish itself, it faces its first major existential threat, arguably even bigger than sheet music ever was. Radio, exactly. It emerges offering listeners live music, event broadcasts, all for free. So the question for the consumer becomes, why should I buy a physical disc when I can just turn on the radio and hear music for free?
And this was a genuine crisis for the early record companies. They saw radio as potentially destroying their entire business model.
So how do they fight back?
They fought back strategically. They lobbied hard, campaigned successfully for license fees from broadcasters. If radio stations were going to play their records, they argued, they should pay for the privilege.
And they won that fight.
They did. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this was the moment the industry had a crucial realization. Radio wasn't necessarily an adversary they had to defeat. It could actually be a massive, free promotional tool.
Right. Subsidized advertising almost.
Exactly. By paying those license fees, the radio industry was essentially subsidizing the record company's product while simultaneously advertising those records to millions of listeners. Radio exposure created demand for the physical discs. It turned a potential enemy into a symbiotic partner.
A relationship that, basically persists to this day between streaming services and record labels in a different form.
Absolutely. The fundamental dynamic was set back then. So by the 1930s and 40s, you've got music being mass-produced on standardized discs, broadcast for free over the radio, and sold physically around the world. This whole technological infrastructure was perfectly primed, ready for the next big genre shift. And that shift was heavily driven by global conflict.
Yeah, the 1940s, that decade is really defined by this major transition because before World War II, the dominant sound of America was swing, big band music.
That's right. And that sound, swing, traces its roots deep into jazz. Jazz originated down in New Orleans, this incredible blend of African rhythms, gospel traditions, blues, a sound pioneered by absolute giants like Louis Armstrong and King Oliver.
Then it spread.
Yeah, as musicians moved, particularly up the Mississippi River, jazz became more formalized, more structured. It evolved into this highly danceable, incredibly popular style called swing, led by band leaders like Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, household names.
And swing was massive, not just popular, but literally massive bands.
Huge bands. You needed these large 12 to 15-piece orchestras. It required elaborate touring setups, huge public ballrooms for people to dance in. It was the absolute dominant popular style of the 30s. But then came World War II, and the war acted as this brutal, swift catalyst for change.
How did the war kill swing?
Well, wartime realities just ended the big band era almost overnight, really. First, conscription. The draft pulled many, many talented musicians into the armed forces, severely limiting the pool of available players for these large ensembles.
Right, you couldn't keep a 15-piece band together.
Exactly. And simultaneously, you had severe travel restrictions, gas rationing, limited train access. It just became nearly impossible for these massive bands to tour profitably across the country anymore. The economics just collapsed.
And culturally, things shifted too.
Yeah, the whole social scene changed. Those massive dance halls, which had been the center of American youth social life, they were slowly replaced by smaller, more intimate venues, clubs, lounges. This created a vacuum, really, that was perfectly suited for a different type of performer.
And there was that symbolic moment, too, Glenn Miller's death.
Right, the death of the beloved bandleader Glenn Miller, his plane disappearing in 1944 while he was en route to entertain troops in Europe. That's widely considered to mark the symbolic end, the closing chapter of the swing era itself.
So as that loud, brash, rhythmic energy of the big bands faded away, what took its place?
A calmer, softer, much more intimate style took over. The era of the crooners and what we call traditional vocal pop. And this transition, this is a moment where the modern concept of the pop star, this omnipresent, solitary cultural figure, truly begins to form.
And the undisputed king of this new sound, the face of the 40s pop scene, was Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. Absolutely. He became the best-selling pop artist of the 1940s, truly defining that smooth, relaxed crooner style. But what made him really revolutionary wasn't just the singing. It was his mastery of every single media format available at the time.
He was everywhere.
Everywhere. Crosby wasn't just a singer. He was a massive radio personality, hosted some of the most popular shows. He was a successful film star, a major box office draw, and of course, a huge record seller. He was arguably the first celebrity to successfully manage that kind of multi-platform career, reaching audiences everywhere, cementing his ubiquity.
And his legacy, I mean, he literally holds the record, right? With White Christmas.
He does. His recording of Irving Berlin's White Christmas from 1942, it's still considered the best-selling single of all time globally, estimated sales over 50 million copies. It's staggering. And that success just demonstrated the immense commercial power of this new vocal pop standard.
But the shift from Crosby's kind of broad appeal, which still resonated mostly with adults, maybe families, to the really focused, screaming hysteria of the modern teen idol that belongs squarely to one man.
Frank Sinatra.
Old Blue Eyes himself,
Uh.
Sinatra's rise, starting as a vocalist with big bands like the Dorsey Brothers, then going solo in the mid-1940s.
It wasn't just a musical event, was it? It was like an economic revolution.
It absolutely was, because his success revealed for the very first time this entirely new and incredibly powerful economic force, the autonomous youth audience, teenagers as consumers in their own right.
This is the famous Bobby Soxers phenomenon.
Exactly, the Bobby Soxers. These were primarily young girls, often identifiable by the ankle socks they wore rolled down the Bobby socks, and they exhibited this intense, often screaming, fainting devotion to Sinatra, this level of mass hysteria directed at a singer. It was completely unprecedented. And what does that tell us about the time, the post-war economy?
It tells us everything, really. These teenagers were basically the first generation with significant disposable income that was specifically targeted at their own entertainment, not just contributing to family necessities. They had allowances, part-time jobs, and money. And they chose to spend it on records, concert tickets, movie tickets, fan magazines, all featuring their idol, Sinatra.
So Sinatra's popularity wasn't just about the music, it was a signal to the industry.
Oh, it was a massive wake-up call for the entire industry. It showed the major record companies, Columbia, RCA, Victor Decca, that the future of pop, the real money, wasn't necessarily in pleasing adult tastes anymore. It was in capturing this ephemeral, volatile, but incredibly financially potent adolescent market.
Wow.
His success fueled that shift away from the legacy big band system and spurred companies to focus entirely on marketing solo pop singers, specifically to attract this newly identified, incredibly powerful youth demographic.
So the significance of Sinatra's rise, it's hard to overstate it.
You really can't. He is fundamentally credited as the first true teen idol. He established the template for that kind of fan hysteria, the screaming, the crying, the fainting that would follow with Elvis mania, Beatlemania, all of it. He proved that young, disposable income was the essential lifeblood of the future global music industry.
Okay, so while Sinatra is establishing this commercial and cultural blueprint for the pop star on the mainstream white charts, something else crucial is happening simultaneously, right? A kind of segregated technological and cultural fusion in the R&B market, setting the stage for the next big explosion.
Absolutely. Rock and roll is brewing, and its roots are deep in the blues.
The blues, undeniably the deep root of so much American music.
Created by former black slaves, primarily in the Mississippi Delta region, they were adapting their complex African musical heritage, blending it with new forms of expression, often born from hardship. The theme centered on personal adversity, economic struggles, deep emotional turmoil. You think of the pioneering work of people like W.C. Handy, who formalized it, or Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues.
And then the music moved, right?
Yeah.
With the Great Migration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When large populations of African Americans moved from the rural South to northern industrial cities in the late 1930s and 40s, searching for work and escaping Jim Crow, they brought the blues with them to places like Chicago.
And this migration led to changes in the music.
It did. It led to the formation of what we call Chicago blues, with artists like the legendary Muddy Waters. And crucially, this new urban environment, loud bars, bigger crowds it required, and really popularized a key technological invention, the electric guitar.
Ah, the electric guitar. Invented when?
Invented by Adolf Rickenbacker back in 1931. But it really found its killer application in the urban blues scene. It changed everything for the genre's physical presence.
How so?
Well, in those loud, bustling northern city bars and nightclubs, the subtle acoustic Delta blues sound just got lost. It couldn't compete with the noise. Amplification, the electric guitar, intensified the sound, creating volumes that could finally cut through that din.
But it wasn't just about being louder, was it?
No, and this is the interesting paradox. The electric guitar meant musicians no longer had to shout or strain to be heard over their own acoustic instruments. This actually allowed singers to focus more on conveying raw, subtle emotion, intimacy even, in their vocal delivery. drawing the listener in rather than just blasting them away with volume.
That electrified form of the blues.
That is the single most indisputable seed of rock and roll. That sound, that feeling.
So by the early 1950s, this electrified urban Chicago blues, it's starting to catch on.
It's surging in popularity, yeah. And interestingly, among both white and black teenagers, this music was being marketed under the name rhythm and blues or R&B. But at the time, and this is shameful, really R&B records were classified by the industry as race music, deliberately segregated from the mainstream pop charts.
Despite the segregation, the kids were finding it.
Oh yeah. The music's infectious, driving rhythm, the often sexually suggestive lyrics which were thrilling to teenagers, and that amplified sound. It appealed directly to young listeners who were hungry for something different, something more exciting than the smooth crooners their parents liked. Artists like Wanani Harris, Howlin' Wolf, they were immensely popular among teenagers of all backgrounds, but getting access, hearing it on the radio, could be difficult depending on where you lived.
Okay, so the music is there, the audience is there, but it needs a catalyst. Enter Alan Freed.
Alan Freed, the ambitious, maybe opportunistic disc jockey working out of Cleveland, Ohio. He becomes absolutely central to legitimizing this sound, popularizing it, and giving it a catchy, slightly notorious new label.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Freed started using and popularizing that term around 1951. He took the name from a well-known blues slang term for sex.
Which must have caused a stir.
Oh, absolutely. By giving this emerging genre this immediate, exciting, and definitely controversial identity, he gave the music instant notoriety. It galvanized support among teenagers while simultaneously polarizing and often terrifying the older generation, the establishment.
And you had pioneers like Little Richard, Chuck Berry.
Absolutely critical figures, bringing this incredible, frenetic stage presence. Chuck Berry's revolutionary guitar playing, taking it to the masses. But the industry, the mainstream radio stations, the record labels, they still struggled with how to bridge those entrenched racial lines that governed airplay and sales.
They needed someone palatable.
Someone who could cross over. The true national explosion, the moment it really broke through everywhere, happened when an artist emerged who could perfectly synthesize these disparate styles, the black R&B, the white country, and cross those established commercial and racial lines.
And that was Elvis Presley.
That was Elvis, the king of rock and roll. He emerged from his rural southern roots, just absorbing everything around him like a sponge. He masterfully blended that driving R&B sound he heard from black bluesmen like B.B. King and Howlin' Wolf with the white country western tradition of artists like Jimmy Rogers and Ernest Tubb. And he added this powerful touch of gospel influence he'd grown up with.
So he wasn't just copying R&B.
No, it was a genuine synthesis. And he helped make that black influence music acceptable, or at least unavoidable, for mainstream white audiences. Not just by maybe cleaning up the sound a little, but by combining it with this raw, visual, overtly sexual energy on stage that was absolutely shocking to the adult world at the time.
The gyrating hips.
The sneer, the whole package. His wild stage performances and the sheer mass hysteria among adolescent girls, a hysteria that really dwarfed even the earlier Sinatra phenomenon that solidified his status as the first true rock and roll icon.
And this cultural fusion, this explosion of rock and roll, it coincided perfectly with some new technology, didn't it? New hardware for actually consuming the music.
Yes. Finally, the format battles of the 20s and 30s, cylinders versus discs, different speeds, that finally settled down. The record format stabilized into two key products that would dominate for decades.
Which were?
In 1948, Columbia Records perfected the 33 and 13 RPM long-playing record, the LP. This durable vinyl disc allowed for up to 25 minutes of music per side. Finally, the industry had a viable medium for selling full-length albums as a coherent artistic statement.
Why the single?
RCA Victor followed swiftly in 1949 with a smaller 7-inch 45 RPM record. Perfect for singles, perfect for jukeboxes, which were hugely popular then.
So you had the LP for albums, the 45 for hits.
Exactly. These two formats provided the standardized physical medium that rock and pop would rely on for the next, 4 decades. It stabilized the industry and allowed it to grow immensely.
Okay, so the genres are fusing, the stars are emerging, the technology for consumption is stable. What's the next big revolution?
The next great revolution wasn't just about who was singing or what was being played. It was about how the sound itself was being captured, manipulated, and manufactured. The recording studio was about to transform from just a place to document a performance into a creative laboratory, an instrument in its own right.
And the 1960s really cemented that transformation, didn't they? Kicked off by that massive cultural wave from across the Atlantic.
The British Invasion, 1964.
What set the stage for that? Why were American teens ready for British bands?
Well, by the early 60s, you could argue American teens were maybe growing a little tired of some of the safer, singles-oriented, sometimes kind of saccharine Bobby pop acts that dominated the charts. Bobby V, Bobby Rydell, Fabian.
And manufactured idols.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, over in the UK, British youth had been devoutly listening to and absorbing American rock and roll and blues records for years, filtering those influences through their own unique social and cultural experiences, like the skiffle craze.
And then the Beatles arrived.
And then the Beatles arrived, combining elements of that skiffle music, American doo-wop, R&B, soul, into this fresh, energetic sound that became known as Merseybeat, named after the river in Liverpool. The impact was just astronomical.
That Ed Sullivan Show appearance.
The legendary. February 1964 drew an estimated 74 million viewers, an audience size that was utterly unprecedented. It signaled the complete surrender, really, of the American youth market to this new, exciting, group-oriented sound from Britain.
And the invasion didn't just bring the Beatles, right? It established different paths.
That's a key point. The invasion created these two distinct, hugely influential paths for pop and rock moving forward. On one hand, you had the more melodic, poppy, studio-focused sounds of the Beatles, really pushing songwriting and sonic innovation.
And the other path.
And on the other, you had the grittier, more blues-based, rebellious image championed by groups like the Rolling Stones, more raw, more dangerous seeming. But critically, what the whole invasion cemented was the primacy of the rock group. The self-contained band, usually writing their own material, built around that core unit of guitars, bass, and drums. That became the dominant format.
Okay, so while Britain is invading, back in the States, we're seeing the rise of these incredible hit factories, these production lines churning out hits with factory-like efficiency, but also with immense artistry and soul.
Motown.
Motown in Detroit. Berry Gordy Jr. He essentially created a hit assembly line, but a brilliant one. He meticulously crafted this distinct house sound, the sound of young America.
How did he do that?
By using the same group of incredible session musicians, known famously as the Funk Brothers, on almost everything. By applying rigorous quality control to the songwriting, the arrangements, the performances, this very centralized production system just generated hit after hit after hit for everyone from Diana Ross and the Supremes to Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye. And it became hugely successful.
Transformed Motown into one of the most successful black-owned businesses in American history. An incredible story.
But there was another model down south, right? Stax Records in Memphis. Very different vibe.
Very different, yeah. In stark contrast to Motown's tight, top-down control, Stax Records home to artists like Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Wilson Pickett. They encouraged a much more organic, spontaneous, musician-driven environment.
Less structured.
Much less structured. Stax famously blurred the line between artist and producer. They emphasized improvisation in the studio, allowing the house band, the incredible Booker T and the MGs, to essentially co-create and produce the records collaboratively during the sessions.
So Motown was slick pop, Stax was raw R&B.
Broadly speaking, yeah. O-Town aimed for that polished, choreographed pop sound with maximum crossover appeal. Stax focused on raw, emotional, often gritty rhythm and blues and soul. But both models, in their own way, demonstrated the immense power of having a distinctive studio with a sound. The studio itself had a character.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, as you hinted earlier. The creative artistry of the producer truly explodes, moving beyond just managing sessions or crafting a house sound to actually inventing the very architecture of the sound itself.
Exactly. And the original pioneer here, the mad scientist in his garage, the man who first really dared to manipulate recorded sound in this way, layering sound upon sound, was Les Paul.
Les Paul, the guitarist.
The legendary guitarist, yes, but also an incredible inventor and recording innovator. Working mostly out of his home workshop in the 1940s and early 50s, way before multi-track machines were common, he pioneered multi-tracking and overdubbing using modified reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorders.
How did he even do that on one machine?
He developed this technique he called sound-on-sound recording. It's pretty ingenious. He physically modified his tape machine, adding an extra playback head just before the recording head, so he could record a new track onto the tape while simultaneously playing back the track that was already recorded slightly earlier on the same tape, electronically mixing them together onto the tape as the new combined track.
Wow. So he's layering sounds directly onto the same piece of tape.
Exactly. He demonstrated this beautifully on his instrumental recordings like Lover, When You're Near Me, where you hear multiple guitar parts all seemingly played at once by him.
But that must have affected the sound quality.
Oh, absolutely. Each time you did this, adding another layer, the fidelity of the previous layers degraded slightly. You got more tape hiss, distortion. Critics at the time actually called it cheating, said he was manipulating the truth of the performance.
But creatively.
Creatively, it unlocked endless possibilities. It fundamentally shifted the focus from just documenting a single live performance in a room to constructing a soundscape layer by layer, creating something that could never actually exist live. The recorded object itself became the art form, not just a picture of it.
Building on that foundation, using dedicated multi-track machines later, the next great sonic architect emerges, Phil Spector.
Ah, Phil Spector and his legendary wall of sound. Spector was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with creating these monumental, almost Wagnerian sonic experiences that would sound incredibly powerful, even coming out of a tiny, cheap transistor radio speaker.
How did he achieve that wall of sound?
He did it by literally doubling, tripling, sometimes even quadrupling up on instruments in the studio. He'd hire maybe 2 or 3 bass players, 3 or 4 guitarists, multiple drummers and percussionists, pianists, all playing the exact same parts, often simple parts, simultaneously in the same room, usually Gold Star Studios in LA.
Creating this huge ensemble sound.
Exactly. And they'd use generous amounts of echo chamber and reverb to blend all those sounds together into this dense, rich, almost overwhelming sonic texture. It just hits you like a wave.
And the result was iconic records.
Absolutely iconic. The Ronettes' Be My Baby, the Righteous Brothers' Unchained Melody, Ike and Tina Turner's River Jeep Mountain High. It completely redefined what a pop song could sound like on the radio. It sounded huge, dramatic, theatrical, and basically impossible to replicate live accurately.
Spector's biggest fan, apparently, took these methods to an even more obsessive artistic extreme.
Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. Yes. Wilson became the true embodiment of the artist as producer. He was so consumed by Spector's work, so fascinated by the possibilities of the studio, that he famously decided to stop touring with the Beach Boys entirely in late 1964. He wanted to focus all his energy on creating in the studio.
And he became utterly obsessed.
Utterly obsessed with meticulous, complex, layered recordings. His masterpiece from this period, Good Vibrations, stands as the definitive example of this almost fanatical approach.
How is that recorded? It sounds incredibly complex.
Famously, he recorded it in modular form, little sections recorded over months, jumping between several different top studios in Los Angeles, sometimes allegedly choosing a studio just to capture a specific sonic quality on one instrument, like the cello sound, in one particular room.
That must have cost a fortune.
The sessions are legendary for their cost and complexity. You reportedly utilized over 90 hours of raw tape, pieced together into a 3.5-minute cycle. And the cost was enormous for the mid-60s estimates range, but maybe the equivalent of around $500,000 today, all in the pursuit of this perfect, unique sonic tapestry. Wilson wasn't just composing songs anymore. He was composing recordings.
Meanwhile, across the pond, the Beatles producer, George Martin, was doing similar boundary-pushing work right, but perhaps in a different style.
George Martin, often called the fifth Beatle, yes, working with the Beatles at EMI's Abbey Road studios. Martin, who surprisingly came from a background producing comedy records and classical recordings, turned out to be perfectly suited, temperamentally and technically, to help fulfill the Beatles' increasingly ambitious and often bizarre demands for unique, never-before-heard sounds as they moved into their psychedelic phase.
They were constantly pushing the limits of the technology they had.
Constantly. Remember, for most of their career, they were working with only 4-track tape recorders, which seems incredibly primitive now. But they use every sonic trick imaginable within those limitations. Slowing down or speeding up the tape to change the pitch and timbre of instruments. Famously, the Baroque-sounding piano solo in My Life was played slower and then sped up.
Using tape backwards.
Yeah, using backwards tape effects on tracks like Rain or parts of Tomorrow Never Knows. Experimenting with cutting up tape and creating tape loops that were run through multiple machines simultaneously on psychedelic masterpieces like Tomorrow Never Knows. Using ADT artificial double tracking, which Martin's team invented, just constant innovation.
So Martin really changed the producer's role, too.
He fundamentally shifted the perception of what a producer did. He went from being primarily a skilled technician, maybe a musical arranger, someone who acted almost like a photographer, accurately documenting a live performance or enhancing it slightly, to being a true artistic collaborator, someone who was painting a picture with sound, capable of manifesting musicians' wildest sonic visions using the studio itself as the palette.
Okay, fast forward a bit. By the 1980s, it feels like the conceptual floodgates were just wide open. Pop music, still defined by its core elements, melody, rhythm, mass appeal, was now openly borrowing, stealing, incorporating every available element from previously distinct genres.
Totally. The walls came down. You see rock blending into pop seamlessly. This was helped enormously, of course, by the widespread commercial adoption of synthesizers and drum machines, which became defining sounds of the era.
Bands like Queen.
Queen is a perfect example. They create this hugely successful, unique niche by blending hard rock aesthetics, heavy metal guitar tones, complex vocal harmonies, and really sophisticated pop song structures. You hear it in massive stadium anthems like We Are the Champions or Bohemian Rhapsody layered theatrical mixing genres effortlessly.
And then the absolute peak of this genre mixing mass appeal approach, 1982, Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Yes.
Yes. That album remains the ultimate masterpiece of genre fusion for maximum impact. It was this perfect, calculated blend of dance, funk, R&B, mainstream pop, and even hard rock. It consciously aimed to appeal to literally every possible demographic simultaneously.
Yep.
Black audiences, white audiences, rock fans, pop fans, dance fans, everyone.
And the song Beat It is maybe the prime example.
Beat It is the definitive example of that synthesis, absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got Jackson's driving dance funk foundation, the pop melody, and then suddenly this explosive, iconic hard rock guitar solo erupts, played by Eddie Van Halen, the premier hard rock guitarist of the day.
That moment felt huge.
It was a statement. Pairing the absolute king of pop with a titan of hard rock, it demonstrated the total, maybe even cynical, but definitely permanent collapse of genre barriers in the pursuit of maximum possible mass appeal. Anything was fair game if it could make the record bigger.
And the sound of the 80s pop, heavily reliant on synthesizers.
Yes, the synthesizer became utterly synonymous with pop music in the 80s, those synth melodies, gated reverb drum sounds. And lyrically, themes often steered further towards party anthems, dance floor escapism, casual love, and romance. Continuing that strategic focus on the youth market, and particularly the female demographic, that the industry first really cottoned onto with Sinatra and the Bobby Soxers 40 years earlier.
Okay, so we've covered a huge amount of ground here. Tin Pan Alley, phonographs, radio, swing, crooners, rock and roll, producers as artists. If we try to wrap this all up, what's the core takeaway for you, for the listener today, trying to understand pop's DNA?
I think the core takeaway is that pop music isn't just one thing. It's this clear, traceable, but constantly evolving lineage. It's defined by this continuous interplay, this push and pull between technological innovation, from the mass-produced sheet music of Tin Pan Alley right through to the multi-track tape experiments of George Martin and beyond, and the strategic commercial efforts of publishers, record labels, and producers. And all of that is constantly reacting to and shaping the evolving tastes and demands of youth culture, from those Bobby Soxers screaming for Sinatra to the Beatlemania fans.
And maybe the biggest conceptual shift in that entire timeline wasn't even the music itself changing styles, but that realization, the one codified by Les Paul and then perfected by people like Spector and Brian Wilson.
The realization that the recording process itself could be the final definitive art form, not just the documentation of a performance, but the thing itself.
Yeah.
That completely redefined the artist's relationship to sound and to the studio.
It's kind of incredible when you think about it. Every modern pop producer today is sitting there in a hyper-advanced digital studio with literally endless tracks, thousands of plugins, instant processing power at their fingertips.
Yeah.
They are fundamentally still following the playful, boundary-pushing playbook that was written by those early pioneers. People like Les Paul tinkering in his garage, Spector packing musicians into Gold Star, George Martin figuring out how to run tape backwards. They were forced to be creative because the technology simply didn't exist yet. They were working around limitations.
That's a really important point. The constraints often fuel the creativity.
Right. And this maybe raises an interesting, provocative question for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up. If that fundamental spirit of innovation in pop, the really groundbreaking stuff, was often rooted in those foundational, sometimes restrictive, analog experiments, these physical constraints that force people to think differently, what truly constitutes a genuinely new sound today, when almost any sonic manipulation is technologically possible with a few clicks? Does true innovation now rely mainly on cultural synthesis, mashing up existing ideas? Or are there still fundamental technological boundaries left to break that could really change the way we create and consume music once again? Something to think about.